Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's the post-game pod from the Wolves' third straight win as they beat the Orlando Magic by 15 on Thursday night. We'll talk about Ant's big start, his big dunk, and also the other thing that's happening more often with this new starting lineup that's generating more offense for this Timberwolves team as they took the fight on the defensive end of the floor to the Magic, just like we saw a bunch last year from Minnesota. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. Timberwolves actually don't play tonight. I think it's second straight Friday they don't play, but they do play tomorrow night. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Last night against the Magic, the Timberwolves won their third straight as they've continued this pattern of lose three, win three, lose three, win three. And here we are with another three-game win streak, a nice win over a admittedly shorthanded, very shorthanded Magic team, but still a very capable team. We'll talk about what was most impressive about this. I want to talk about the defense the Wolves put forward, which is unlike what we've seen for most of the season and a lot like what Orlando typically does to teams. And then also something that we're seeing more of over the last three games since Chris Finch made the change of the starting lineup to put Dante DiVincenzo in instead of Mike Conley. A lot of players had good games for Minnesota, so there's a lot to get to here in this one. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a reminder that you can subscribe to the daily newsletter over at LockedOnDaily.com. It's one stop for Ultimate Team and League coverage delivered right to your inbox every day, Monday through Friday. Again, subscribe at LockedOnDaily.com. You'll get notes from this podcast, and then you'll also get some great national articles and links to other Timberwolves content too. It really is a great one-stop shop. Okay, let's go ahead and get into Wolves Magic. There's a lot to like from this game, and I'll setting the table for this. Obviously, no Paolo Banchero. He's supposed to come back tonight. The Wolves kind of lucked out in that sense because Zion returned Tuesday for the Pelicans. And Paolo was supposed to return either Thursday or Friday. He's coming back Friday. So no Banchero, of course, still no Wagner brothers. Those guys are out for extended periods of time. And still no Jalen Suggs, the Minnesota native who fell hard last week, had to be helped off the floor and still isn't playing for them with the back injury. So those guys were all out. And yeah, the Wolves should have won. I believe they were 4.5 or 5-point favorites on FanDuel on the road in Orlando. But it's still a capable Magic team that was 22-16. Remember, Banchero's only played 5 games this year anyway, so they've been really good without him. They just beat a admittedly shorthanded Knicks team by I think 9 or 10 at the Garden earlier in the week. They still had Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. They still had Gogo Batadze. They still had Cole Anthony. They still had Wendell Carter Jr., Jonathan Isaac. Like, this is still a very good team, a very well coached team. And I think what was most impressive wasn't simply that they beat a shorthanded team, but the fact that there was never really any doubt. They jumped on them early. Yes, it got to single digits a few times. Even in the fourth quarter, there was garbage time. The Wolves lost garbage time. Like, really, they won this. Should have been more than a 15-point win. That's what was most impressive is that they essentially did blow them out, because we don't always see that from this Wolves team. And you got to play and you got to beat who's in front of you, and that's what they did. The other thing is the way in which they went about it. We'll get a little bit more to the X's and O's and the specifics of that, but just like high level, I was really worried coming into this game, and I said as much on Thursday's show about how good Orlando is at forcing turnovers and how bad the Wolves are at turning the ball over. Now, Jalen Suggs is a big part of that for them, so him not playing definitely matters, but they still they're second in the league in opponent turnover rate. They turn people over like crazy. They are a top 5 defense, actually second in the league overall in defensive rating. And the Timberwolves didn't score the ball a ton. They only scored 104 points in the game. They shot 40% for the field. So that's still true. But for the Wolves to only turn it over 8 times is incredible. The Timberwolves they've actually improved a little. I think coming into this game, they were 22nd in the NBA in offensive turnover rate. But we've seen them have 16, 17, 18, 20 plus turnover games as an offense that have just completely sunk them this season. And for Minnesota to only have 8 turnovers against an Orlando team that forces turnovers, better than anybody but OKC. I think their turnover rate's like 16% as a defense, which is nuts, is super impressive. And on the flip side, Minnesota had 9 steals and forced 14 Orlando Magic turnovers. 16 Orlando Magic turnovers. Sorry, I forgot team turnovers. Minnesota had 10 total turnovers, which isn't bad. That's still really good for them. 16 total turnovers if you include team turnovers, shot clock violations, etc. for the Magic. 16 total turnovers. Minnesota had 9 steals in this game. That is a really strong defensive game for Minnesota. And no, Orlando's not a good offense, and they were missing all the guys I mentioned, Mancaro and the Wagners and Suggs. They were missing all those guys. But you still have to play the team in front of you. You still have to hold them to 38% shooting and 25% from 3 and only allow 19 free throw attempts. Only, they did a decent enough job on allowing offensive rebounds, not allowing too many second chance opportunities for the Magic. Orlando doesn't run. The Wolves didn't let them run. They did everything they needed to do in this game. And honestly, if Ant had just made a couple more shots down the stretch, or I should say down the stretch, in like the third quarter or earlier in the fourth quarter, like this thing could have gotten to 25-30, probably should have, and had even more than 3 minutes of garbage time. But everything else about this game was about perfect. The way that the Wolves went about it, the game plan against this particular team, and the fact that I think the best way to say it is they beat the Magic at their own game. Orlando pressures you, causes turnovers, tries to make you play sloppy, and then they just score enough along the way to win the game. And that's exactly the sort of team I was very worried about this Wolves team playing. We saw the fits that the Pelicans gave Minnesota. The start of the third quarter on Tuesday was a disaster. Just last week, we saw what OKC did to Minnesota when Minnesota had the ball, with their length, their athleticism, their activity, their ability to close gaps on the defensive end of the floor. And that's what had me worried about this game. But the Wolves, to their credit, did everything right and beat the Magic at their own game. The intensity with which the Wolves played themselves defensively reminded me, especially early in this game, like the first stint for the starting unit looked like last season's Wolves. It really did. Like they were flying all over the place. They were, as I said in the open, taking the fight to the Magic, doing to the Magic exactly what I was afraid Orlando would do to Minnesota, and exactly what we've seen OKC and at times New Orleans and other teams do to the Timberwolves. Instead, the Wolves did it. They just came out as the aggressors in this game, which is not typical for the 2024-25 Minnesota Timberwolves. And if this is a true shift in how they're approaching things, then like we're going to, I don't know, I don't want to make any grand predictions based off of a win over the shorthanded Magic. But if they play like they did, especially in the first quarter of this game moving forward, we're going to have a very different feeling about where this season sits for Minnesota. And frankly, the way that they beat the Magic is the way that they should play every team. And it didn't feel like they were too cool for school, which is kind of the phrase I think is pretty accurate to describe how the Wolves have approached so much of the season was, and I've said this before, look, we got to the conference finals. We'll be all right. We got Ant. We'll be all right. And from Ant's perspective, I'm Ant. We got to the conference finals last year. We'll be all right. And it's not that simple. And it's nearly halfway through the season. I mean, they're going to, in 10 days, we'll be halfway through the schedule. Like, that's too late to turn it on. But they're fortunate because in this jumbled Western Conference, they're right in the thick of things. And they're only like a game, I think, getting out of the play-in range. Let's see, a half game. They're half game behind the Lakers and 6th in the West. They're only a game and a half out of 4th place in the Western Conference. And they're better than the Lakers, who had just made a major trade. And we've seen them play with both Denver and Dallas this year. We'll see Memphis here shortly, and John Morant's coming back. So, we'll get to play against John Morant. And we've seen them compete. Like, they could still easily, but it's very much on the table that the Timberwolves are going to be a top 4 seed in the Western Conference still, despite all of this. And the point is, if this is something they can bottle and say, let's play like this moving forward. And I know there's been a couple other games this year where I've said this, but but being able to play the Magic how the Magic should have been playing them and win in that way. And I want to talk about Ant here next segment. I want to spend a lot of time on Ant. That's super encouraging. And I think moving forward, that it's a really positive signal for Minnesota. All right, let's move on and talk about Anthony Edwards, his crazy start to the game. We'll talk about the poster dunk. And, offensively, what looks a little bit different about this new starting lineup and Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert specifically as we look ahead here. But what this Magic game specifically tells us about those things. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at TurboTax. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Are you tired of the endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes? Well, now that's a thing of the past. You see, taxes don't need to be complicated or stressful. TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with a TurboTax expert who can get to work on your return right away. No more waiting for answers. No more wondering if you're missing out on deductions, whether you've got one form or 20. TurboTax experts give your taxes the undivided attention while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on what really matters. You won't have to lift a finger, but you'll get the peace of mind knowing that your taxes are being handled by the pros. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today. Get matched with your expert who's ready to take your taxes off your plate so you can focus on your day. Only available at TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, let's talk Anthony Edwards, and let's talk the Timberwolves offense overall. So the start of this game, Minnesota wins the first quarter by a 29-18 margin. Anthony Edwards is gangbusters, like immediately hits 3 threes, like barely touches net. Like it looks like this is just going to be another. And like, look at the last few games that Edwards has played. Right, he had 53 in the loss against the Pistons. Turns around, gets 37 on Monday. Gets 32 on Tuesday, and it felt like another one of those, like, hey, we're in for a 30-plus Ant game. It's going to be crazy. Well, he had like 9 in the first few minutes. He ended up with only 21 and did a lot of it at the line. He actually only made 5 field goals in this game, and 3 of them were in the first few minutes. I think he had 1 3 in the second quarter, and then he had the dunk. And that was his game. Like that, those were his made shots. He did get to the line a bunch, and that's exactly like, obviously, this is stating the very obvious that him being aggressive and going to the basket allowed him to get to 20-plus points despite the fact he only made 5 shots. He was 7 of 9 at the free throw line, which, by the way, the Wolves were terrible at the free throw line early in this game. I think Gobert, Nas, and Ant all missed both ends of a 2-shot chance at the free throw line. It was really bad. But Ant only shot 26% for the field, yet he scored 21 points because he got to the line 9 times. And it was funny because early in the game, it was the Wolves' defense because Ant got a couple opportunities in transition and kind of secondary break action of those 3 made threes. One was straight up transition. He just came down, pulled up. The other was coming out of transition. He went to the corner, got an open shot. And then there was one, I think they ran an ATO where he actually got a shot out of the corner for a 3. Unless I'm confusing 2 of them. But like that might have been the second quarter make. At any rate, the Wolves' defense turned into offense, which helped him get some threes. And then their ball movement offensively. And then the other thing that we saw from Ant in this game that was so impressive, and it's something we've been clamoring to see, and I think we have seen a little bit more of it lately, but when they were putting 2 on the ball, there was a possession, I think it was in the second quarter, where the personnel on the floor was, Jaden wasn't on the floor, Nas was on the floor, Nikhil was on the floor, and Dante DiVincenzo was on the floor. I can't remember it was Rudy, because Rudy ends up with the dunk. They middle pick and roll, put 2 on the ball, blitz Ant, but stay home on the shooters in the corner, who, by the way, are Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Dante DiVincenzo, 2 very good corner 3-point shooters. Rudy's standing wide open in the paint with 2 arms in the air, and Ant gets a jump pass to him for a dunk. Couple things there. One, Ant's read was great, and it seems like that would be obvious, but it's actually really hard. Even though Gobert's 7'2", standing under the rim with his hands above his head, he probably is over 9 feet. You're still looking over, Batadze was on the floor. Like, you're looking over some other pretty big guys to try and find him and get him the ball. So good read and good pass. But personnel-wise, if Jaden McDaniels is in one of those corners instead of or Dante DiVincenzo, I mean, those Magic guys are playing too. They're not staying home. One of them is shading toward Rudy to try and play Rudy and Jaden in the corner. You can't do that when you've got legit 3-point shooters out there. So that's another example of the lineup combinations and why Jaden, really hurts this offense. That's just the easy way to say it. As crass as that sounds, he hurts the offense. That was a great opportunity. They just got a dunk because they could play everybody else besides Rudy on the perimeter as a real 3-point threat. By the way, like this is obvious, and I don't mean to completely pile on Jaden, but watch the opposing team's bench anytime Jaden shoots a three. They always clap, whether he makes it or misses it, because they're fine with that. It's not exactly to the level of like the Wolves leaving Josh Giddey open or leaving Chris Dunn open the other night against the Clippers, but like that is what teams want. Of all the options on the floor, they'd rather have that than Rudy getting the ball on the roll. I promise you that. I know that Rudy can get, like teams hope to strip the ball from him. He brings it low and Rudy can't catch every pass. Like that's all true. But the point per possession of Rudy as a roll man is much greater than Jaden with the ball in his hands, period. It just is. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm very confident in that. Teams would much rather have Jaden shooting the basketball. So that's just a note moving forward for the lineup, but also a positive Ant thing. So Ant goes from knocking down threes early to making those reads. And then as they start to get a little less aggressive on Ant, because they're realizing he's open to pass the ball and, the shot was a little bit off, Ant actually turns the corner and starts taking it to the basket. And what does that get him? 9 free throw attempts on the night, which is that's a ton for him this season and especially recently. And an absolute monster of a poster dunk over Anthony Black. I think it's his best one of the year, unless I'm forgetting one, but I'm pretty sure that's the best one of the year. And it's not the John Collins dunk. It's probably not quite the Warriors dunk from, I think, his rookie year. Certainly not the one against the Raptors from his rookie year. But it might be it might be 4th or 5th on his all-time dunks list. Like that was a nice dunk. I mean, he jumped. One of the feet was barely in the paint. The other one was completely outside the paint. And as always, make sure you get the Michael Grady call of that one and get the visiting team broadcast call of it. That's always fun. Trust me. Go listen to the Magic team broadcast call of the Ant dunk. But that's that. I know that Ant ended up shooting 5 of 19 from the field, but this was a really good Ant game. Everything about the way that he played, his aggressiveness from 3 early, which you can do with this starting lineup. And by the way, that's the other trend I wanted to hit real quickly here. Is since the starting lineup has changed, now it's only 3 games, but Ant has just been bombs away from 3. Now, he did it against the Pistons in the 53-point game. It was 10 for 15 on threes. But remember, he started the season, the first 5 games, he shot 12 or more threes every night. The Wolves went 3-2. They had a couple tough losses. The Lakers loss was, whatever, opening night, and then a close loss to the Mavs. But they beat Denver, they beat Sacramento and Toronto, and he shot at least 12 threes in every game. And then he got away from it a little bit. He was still averaging, 8-9 threes a game, and he has for most of the year. But during this recent kind of up and down stretch, before the Pistons game, since the start of the month of December, we're talking 13 games in December through January 2nd. Ant only shot double-digit threes twice. He attempted 10 threes in a win over Golden State, a blowout win, and he attempted 11 threes in a 10-point loss to Golden State. No other game did he attempt 10 or more threes. He was always in the 7 and 9 range. The last 4 games, he attempted 15, 13, 11, and 11. Since the starting lineup changed on Monday, he attempted 13 threes against the Clippers, 11 against the Pelicans, 11 against the Magic. He scored 37, 32, and 21 in those games. I believe that the starting lineup adjustment is going to allow Ant to get more threes, 3-point attempts. Part of it is Dante DiVincenzo is a legit threat off the dribble. And I know Dante didn't make any 2s in this game, and he didn't play great. But teams have to account for Dante DiVincenzo off the dribble, and it also allows more space for Julius Randle. I'm not saying Mike Conley doesn't space the floor, but teams know Mike Conley doesn't want to take them off the dribble. And I mean, everyone's seen Chris Finch has been imploring in the media. Jim Peters has talked about it on the broadcast. He wants Mike Conley to be more aggressive because they can't just have multiple in the old starting lineup. The only guys that were going to attack you from the perimeter off the dribble are Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle. Rudy's not creating his own offense. Jaden McDaniels isn't generally, and when he does, teams are fine with it if he's shooting his tough 10, 12-foot weird fadeaway. And Conley doesn't want to. Conley's a threat catch and shoot. Rudy's a threat on the roll or with the lob, and Jaden isn't. So teams can load up on Ant and live with what Randle gives them and hope that maybe Randle gets a bad matchup or double him in the deep post, whatever. Now, Dante can take people off the dribble. That's something that can and will happen. And off the bench, Conley can play. They can stagger the minutes, so he's still playing with Rudy and playing less with Julius Randle, so Conley and Randle don't have to play together. We talked about this on yesterday's show, but those numbers together are not great. And so it should allow, and again, we have a 3-game sample, but it should allow more space overall in the starting lineup. And if Ant shoots threes with that given space, that only opens up more things like the pass to Rudy. If teams are loaded up on Ant, and the possibility of Dante to attack off the catch as a second side creator. And Julius Randle isn't going to get those same double teams if Ant's shooting threes and teams are worried about him shooting threes, so they're essentially blitzing him on the perimeter. The defense is in rotation, and Randle can attack a closeout. Randle can attack a late rotation, and that's where he could be really dynamic. And Julius was great in this game. We'll talk about him in studs and duds. I don't want to lose sight of that. This was one of Julius's better games as a Timberwolf because he got to attack one-on-one a lot. He was aggressive in doing it and didn't try to do too much and had an effective double-double in this game. I know I focused on Ant and the efficiency was much better for Julius Randle, but Ant is the focal point. And this was like almost I know I said this at the top that overall it was almost a perfect game plan and a perfect execution by the Wolves. And I know they only scored 104 points and shot 40%, but sometimes you just miss shots. And that was the case with Ant in this game. The process was there. And for Julius to get a 20-10 double-double and Anthony Edwards to score 21 points and shoot 11 threes and get 7 assists with only 2 turnovers, that's a pretty good, that's all I told you about this game. That's a pretty good result in terms of individual stat lines and what you'd want to see. I want to get into studs and duds here next, and that's how we'll close the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about? Or maybe that you were paying for twice? That's definitely happened to a lot of people that I know that I've talked to about Rocket Money. Several subscriptions you don't even realize you're paying for, and Rocket Money makes it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users. It has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. One of the best features is the subscription tracker. You can use it to cancel services you're not using anymore. You can save a ton of money doing that. Plus, with their goals feature, you can automatically set aside money for the future with no more stressing about budgeting every month. And we are in a new year, so I know budgeting is a big thing for people, New Year's resolutions, etc. And this is a great way to kind of uncover things that you are unaware of in terms of subscriptions and money that you're spending that you don't need to be spending. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, let's talk studs and duds. We already talked about Ant. I would give him a stud. I know he shot 5 of 19. This was a great Ant game. I don't need to talk more about him. 21 points, 7 assists, only 2 turnovers, 5 of 19 shooting, 4 of 11 on threes, got to the line 9 times, ended up making 7 of them. He missed his first 2, made his last 7. It was a plus 20 in this game that the Wolves won by 15. Really good Ant game. I'm also going to give a stud to Julius Randle. I talked about him a minute ago. 23 points, 10 rebounds, 8 of 16 shooting, 6 free throw attempts. He only had 2 assists, but he also only turned it over twice. If Julius could get 10 boards, shoot 50% from the field, he gets to the line 6 times, Chris Finch will take that every night. 1 of 3 on threes. I like his 3-point volume to be a little bit higher, but I thought he was smart with his, and also being physical with the matchup he got from the Magic. He had the ability to take Jonathan Isaac and Wendell Carter Jr. I feel like one or both of those guys would be a better one-on-one matchup with Julius Randle. And if I'm the Magic, I would have considered doing my lineup a little bit differently than playing those guys only 15 and 18 minutes respectively, because Batazzi was obviously had to pay attention to Gobert. So all that to say, Julius Randle took advantage of the opportunities he had in this game. And I repeat what I said last segment, that I think that the revamped starting lineup long-term is going to help Julius Randle, and Conley playing off the bench more with Nas and with Rudy Gobert, with the way the rotation will be staggered, I think will be more beneficial. And Randle has that synergy with Dante DiVincenzo. And I think having a little bit more space on the floor because of the threat of Dante attacking off the dribble, because now it's Dante and Ant doing that from the backcourt instead of just Ant. Teams have to respect that, or the fact that Dante is going to pull from 30 feet, which Mike Conley's not doing. Even though Conley's a great three-point shooter, still a very good three-point shooter, he's not shooting from 30 feet, and he's not attacking you off the dribble. Dante could do those things. I think that opens things up for Julius Randle. So Ant, I'd go Randle, and then off the bench, Mike Conley was good. I think I'd probably go Naz Reid. Naz was actually the third leading scorer in this game for the Wolves anyway, 16 points on 5 of 9, 2 of 4 from 3. He was great in the first half as the Wolves kind of built that initial lead up to double digits. Naz attacked off the dribble, then he knocked down a 3. Ant had a crazy, I should have talked about this earlier. Ant from the right corner in the first half had just a nuts left-handed pass that was completely on the mark through traffic, one-handed, left-handed, whipped it to the left slot to find Naz Reid for an open 3. It was a crazy pass. Like, you don't see very many left-handed, one-handed passes from one side of the floor to the other, and especially against a defense like Orlando that typically would be all over that. And then Naz knocks down the 3. Naz was super good. 16 points. He got to the line 6 times, 3 rebounds, 2 steals, and an assist, and a block for Naz Reid. So strong Naz Reid performance. I talked about Gobert earlier. He had 10 and 12 in this game. He was really good and controlled the paint. This was another game where he was able, because of the way Batadze plays and the way the Magic play, their lack of 3-point, capabilities. They shoot threes, but they don't make them, which was the case in this game. They were 10 of 40 from 3. Rudy was able to showcase his abilities and drop, like just really impactful, protecting the paint. Somehow had 0 blocks in this game. I swear he had at least 1 or 2, but he certainly had an impact. And as we've seen with Rudy, he doesn't need to block shots to do that, although he had 6 the other night against the Pelicans on Tuesday. But both the Pelicans and Magic matchups were advantageous for him to showcase what he's still able to do as the reigning defensive player of the year. Let's see. I don't think I have any duds. Jaden wasn't great, but he did have 8 boards and he was fine. Nobody was actively bad. Nikhil had a very ho-hum game, but he also had 6 boards and 3 assists, and rebounding's a big deal against a team like Orlando that misses a lot of shots and generally offensive rebounds decently well. The Wolves did a good job of keeping Orlando off the glass in this game. And I thought Nikhil and Jaden were certainly part of that. So I don't know. I don't really have any duds for this one. Next up for the Wolves, Saturday night, they take on the Memphis Grizzlies for the first time this year. And Ja Morant is expected to play in this game. He hasn't played in a bit. So the Wolves will get to see a not fully full strength. There's some other guys, like I think Marcus Smart's questionable for this game too. But it'll be, we'll see Memphis on Saturday and then again in a week and a half. So a couple of Grizzlies games upcoming here for the Wolves. And to get to see Ja and Ant go at it's going to be a lot of fun. And also there's, of course, the Western Conference standings bit. Minnesota is currently 7th in the West and Memphis is 3rd, but they're only separated by 3.5 games. And this is another one where long-term winning the tiebreaker is going to matter. Very likely. The Wolves have already won the tiebreaker against the Clippers. I believe they've already won it against the Warriors. I believe they've already won it against the Kings, who are now at this point, they're only 2 games behind the Wolves. They've, of course, got on a hot streak after firing Mike Brown because they weren't actually that bad to begin with. They just had some bad luck, and Mike Brown was the fall guy. So tiebreakers are super important. And the Wolves have actually done pretty well with that in the Western Conference. The teams they've struggled with are the teams at the very top, Portland, and then some Eastern Conference teams. Frankly, they're in pretty good shape tiebreaker-wise, and it would be great to get off to a good start against the Grizzlies in that sense as well. All right. That's all we got for you today here on the show. Of course, we'll have the live postcast, on YouTube, on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. Saturday night, Luke and Jack will get you with the postcast. We'll have that audio here over the weekend. I'll be back on Monday We'll do a bit of a hybrid post-game pod from Saturday's game against Memphis, and then we'll look ahead to the Wolves game on Monday night. I'm blanking on who they're playing, but I'm going to look it up real quick. So we'll talk about the Memphis game Saturday, and then we'll also preview Wolves Wizards on Monday night. Finally, the Wolves get to play the Wizards, and well, I don't want to jinx it. It'll be nice to get to play some of these New Orleans and Washingtons and et cetera. But there's also the two Memphis games. You got a Knicks and a Cleveland coming up here too. So it's not like it gets super easy, but it'll be nice to get a Wizards game in there. So hopefully if the Wolves can beat Memphis Saturday, that's a real shot at 5 straight for Minnesota headed into Golden State next Wednesday. All right. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder to subscribe to the daily newsletter at lockedondaily.com. Be much obliged if you could do that, and you'll get the newsletter in your inbox Monday through Friday. All things Wolves, some great NBA coverage, and more to your inbox Monday through Friday. Remember, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and of course, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.